damn it, I'm cold. Back in my day, we didn't have the Netflix and the streaming services. We used this platform called VHS. It was really convenient in its own right. You flip this little switch right here and you could open it up. And here's the film that was, your movie was on there. And sometimes this film would get stuck in the VCR and you'd have to wind the tape up by putting your finger in here and winding. There was all these settings. If you had yourself a recordable tape, like SP, LP, EP, you could record up to 6 hours on a VHS, but it wasn't the best video quality. Here you look at a store-bought VHS, and it's got this little square right here. A little trick of the trade. If you put a piece of Scotch tape over that, you could record over the store-bought VHS. And every now and again, you had to adjust the tracking. You see, sometimes the picture wasn't that great, so there were these little arrow buttons on the television or the VCR, so you could hit up sometimes, and the little mess up would go up or down, and then until finally you got yourself a good picture. You had yourself a perfect picture on the VHS. And sometimes when you would rent videos from the video store, because those nasty people would leave their VHS out with no dust cover and it got all gross and disgusting, so you'd have to go out and buy a cleaning tape. And there was a wet cleaning tape and a dry cleaning tape. The dry cleaning tape you didn't have to worry about. You just put it right in the VCR and polish the little knobs inside the thing, and then the wet one was more complicated. You had to add eye drops to the side of the thing, and then you'd pop it in, and then it would but it would clean better, so it was worth the work experience. I miss these days of the old VHS. Oh, technology, what have you wrought?
Hi, welcome to the Motion Picture Notion. I'm your host, Gabriel Burton. There's a show out on Netflix. It's been out for several years, Black Mirror. You may have heard of it. Really, to date, I would say it's kind of like the modern Twilight Zone. It's Twilight Zone, but more relevant specifically to today. I understand that there is a new Twilight Zone series. Personally, I think that Black Mirror is better and kind of mirrors the old Twilight Zone. Now, to be clear, this video is not going to be a specific review for that show. I do really love it. I've watched a lot of episodes of it, and I think that it's great. It's unfortunate because my wife only really watched the first episode with me, which, I mean, apart from being, the whole show is kind of disturbing, but that first episode really didn't kind of fall in line with like the theme of the whole show. And it involved a man having sex with a pig. It was actually quite disturbing. It wasn't bad, it was actually pretty good, but I think that it kind of turned her off to the whole thing. I mean, not for nothing, Black Mirror isn't the type of show that you watch when you're in a good mood. You have to be in a very particular type of mood to watch it, except for Bandersnatch, but we'll get back to that later. The theme of this video is really the evolution of our society. It's my own aging as a millennial, and there you go. My wife and I went to New Haven recently, this past weekend, to see Marc Maron, who I think is a brilliant comedian. I mean, I disagree with him politically pretty thoroughly, but he's a genius. I mean, he's a very funny guy, and it's like, even the humor that I don't agree with, it's so damn hysterical and well thought out that, you know, you can't help but appreciate it. But he brought up the singularity. The idea that man and machine are sort of becoming one. And I would like to explore that topic via the way our society is going, but I'd also like to kind of end this video with a positive note on where we may be heading, because I like to be an optimist as best as I can. I have to, otherwise, I'll go crazy. So I've heard recently that the amount of people going to see actual films in theaters is down by approximately 20%. While I understand, that is to me a little bit of a bummer. Hollywood is becoming a little bit out of touch, and it is probably for the better that we're going in the direction that we're going. But there's something tangible about our society that is slowly eroding away. Streaming services are great. The conveniences are great. I have been, since the existence of this show, filming, editing, and uploading all of my videos from a phone. That's amazing. That is an amazing opportunity that my father never had, and he strove for the very same things. But he had to deal with analog, where like you would edit on a VHS and then rewind and then stop it where you needed to stop it and then have to go back. And every time you would replay it, it would lose a generation, meaning that every time you would replay it, the quality of video would go down. So it was a lot more difficult than what we currently have at our fingertips. And while I am obviously grateful for that, it does sort of beg the question, like, what does that say about us as a society? Because I do truthfully think that Hollywood, in the traditional sense, in terms of people going out to see movies, is slowly dying. I'm not saying that it's going to happen this decade or even the next one, but it's like a very kind of slow progression. You have all these streaming services that can get you the highest quality digital like that. You don't have to wait for anything. We've entered an age where it's like people don't really necessarily want to wait for the latest video that they've been craving for the past however many months or years even. Coming from the perspective of somebody who was expecting a Phantasm 5 when Phantasm 4 came out in 1998 and didn't get one until 2016, there is sort of like an excitement in the waiting. My high school years were the early 2000s, but like my childhood was the 90s, okay? I am a typical millennial. And I remember that when I was in elementary school, like we would go out to Discovery Zone. Most of you kids probably don't even remember what that is, but it was basically like an indoor playground with like all these like plastic tubes and slides and ball pits and zip lines and crazy shit. You don't even remember FYE. To hell with you. But basically, there were all these games indoors that you could play, and if you were good at them, you could win tickets, and you could take the tickets, and you could buy cheap little prizes with them at the front counter, and you felt very accomplished about everything that you had gotten, even though the gifts were very cheap. I remember in the 90s and 2000s, FYE used to take up what amounts to like probably 5 stores right now. They had a section for VHS, they had a section for laser discs, they had a section for comic books, and they had a whole separate like entity to the store, which was the arcade, where kids could go and hang out. That in and of itself, just that one establishment, has more shit to do than an entire mall nowadays. FYE, which still exists to its credit, is just this dwindling business that sells DVDs and Blu-rays to people and novelty items, essentially, and that's it. We live in an age of convenience, and I love Amazon, and I love like all the nostalgic shit that you could find, the specific things that you can look up and order, and it'll be at your house within a week. And I mean, when you look at a system like that, you're sort of like, why would you want to do anything else? Why would you want to frequent a store? FYE is really the last dwindling remnant of really what the old video stores were. And it's really a shame because, I mean, to me, again, I'm aging. I'm an aging millennial. Going to a video store was really just like a cool experience, you know? You can go there and even back in the day when I was too young to watch like the horror movies that I currently watch, I remember going to that section of the video store. There was a local video store called Showtime Video, and they had a separate room for like all their porno videos that wasn't like very well blocked off. So it was kind of nice. Like you could go in there with your friend when you were like, 15, 16 years old. You could, have your friend sort of like work as a spotter and keep their eye on the person up at the front register so that you could like, creep around the corner and sneak a peek like a little pervert. It was just such an experience, it was a physical experience, seeing all of these things on all of these shelves. And it's like the will to get out of your house. And I understand that we're talking about like going somewhere to rent a movie so that you could go home and sit on your ass and watch said movie. And that's the beginnings of like where we're at. And I'm not shitting on convenience, but I do have sort of a nostalgia and a longing for that will to go outside and do something. Now, Black Mirror has addressed a lot of this. Our reliance on technology, the fact that human beings live in convenience, kind of like what Mark Maron was talking about, the singularity, where it's like humankind will eventually be like a fleshy appendage of something far greater than it, like WALL-E, again, for example. And it makes me think about Black Mirror Bandersnatch, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video. That is, if you haven't seen it, please, for love of God, if you have Netflix, you must check it out. It's essentially a choose-your-own-adventure. You have to have the remote in your hand the entire time, and it's a story set in the 80s, and I don't really want to get into how like deep and meta it gets. I'm using this video as a recommendation for this in part, but it gets really meta, and the characters in the story actually start to acknowledge your existence as a decision maker. And I really truthfully believe that this is the bare bones of the future of media, sort of like Nintendo Wii or stuff like that, or even like Pokemon Go, where it inspires people to go outside to look for things, to sort of like, oh my God, there's a Pikachu in this park, or a Charizard, or whatever the hell. It's the same basic principle where it connects you, it involves you. Now, Bandersnatch, Black Mirror Bandersnatch, obviously you're sitting at home, you're doing this from your couch, but I do think that that's the future of media, and I think that the future of media is going to get us back outside digitally. Like, there's a lot of advancements that have been made in like virtual reality, kind of like a living, breathing experience, kind of like what you're doing. I think that's where we're headed, and honestly, I hope that's where we're headed, because if it is just as simple as being able to order or film or edit or upload anything from your phone, and that's it, then I mean, what motivation do we really have to go outside, to do anything, to commune with one another? We have social media, which has connected us digitally, but not in person, not in interaction, not in actual experiences and risk-taking and fun and excitement. So, I'm an optimist, and I like to think that we are headed in the direction where media is going to get our fat, lazy asses outside and connect with one another, even if it is through a work of fiction. And that's all she wrote.